Nobody warned Danny Harlow about the smell. That was the first thing that hit him when the transport shuttle docked at Orbital Station Farron. A thick mix of engine grease, alien sweat, and something sweet that he could not identify. He grabbed his duffel bag, stepped through the airlock, and immediately bumped into a creature that looked like a walking mushroom. It squeaked at him in a language he did not understand and shuffled away. Welcome to the Midrim. Danny was 28 years old, built like a refrigerator, and had spent the last 3 years hauling freight on lunar stations closer to Earth. The pay was terrible. The hours were worse. But Farron offered double rates for a 6-month cargo contract, and Danny needed the money. His mother back in Glasgow needed surgery, and Earth medical bills did not pay themselves. He followed the signs to the employment processing office on the lower decks. The corridors were narrow and loud. Species of every shape squeezed past each other. Tall ones with too many arms, short ones covered in fur, floating ones that left a faint glow behind them. Danny kept his head down and walked. The processing office was a small room with flickering lights and a counter barely held together by bolts. Behind it sat a finny female, small, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in soft blue fur with enormous dark eyes. Her name tag read Rila. She looked up at Danny, and her eyes went even wider. "You are human?" she asked in broken common tone. "Aye," Danny said. "Here for the cargo contract." Rila nodded quickly and began pulling up documents on a cracked screen. Her hands were shaking slightly. Danny noticed, but said nothing. She processed his work permit, his species registration, his quarters assignment. She was efficient despite the trembling. "I will show you the lower decks," Rila said, standing up. She barely reached Danny's chest. They walked through the station together. Rila pointed out the mess hall, the medical bay, the cargo lifts. She spoke in short, careful sentences. Danny listened and took mental notes. He noticed something else too. Rila walked close to the walls. She flinched when larger species passed by. She kept her eyes on the floor. Then the corridor shook with heavy footsteps. 3 figures rounded the corner ahead. The one in front was massive, 7 feet tall, gray-plated skin, for thick arms, and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone with a dull knife. The 2 behind him were slightly smaller, but built from the same mold. Rila froze. The lead figure walked straight down the center of the corridor. Workers pressed themselves against the walls to let him pass. When he reached Rila, he did not slow down. He shoved her sideways with one arm, like she was a piece of furniture. Her documents scattered across the floor. She hit the wall and slid down. The 3 figures kept walking without a glance back. Danny stood still for a moment. Then he knelt down and started picking up the papers. "You all right?" he asked. Rila nodded quickly, gathering the rest of the documents with trembling hands. "That is Grun. He does this. Everyone knows. Nobody stops him. Why not? Bathory are very strong. Grun runs the lower decks. He takes credits from workers and vendors. If you do not pay, he hurts you. Station security cannot do much." Danny handed her the last sheet of paper. He did not say anything else about it. They finished the tour. Rila showed him his quarters, a tiny room with a cot, a locker, and a window that looked out at the gas giant the station orbited. It was ugly and it was cramped, and Danny had slept in worse. He dropped his duffel bag on the cot and started unpacking. Clothes, toiletries, a photograph of his mother taped to the inside of the locker door, and at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in an old shirt, a pair of boxing hand wraps. Faded red, frayed at the edges. They had seen a lot of use back in Glasgow, back when Danny fought in amateur bouts on Friday nights in gyms that smelled like sweat and bleach. He held them for a long moment. Then he put them in the locker and closed the door. That evening, Danny sat in the mess hall eating something that tasted like wet cardboard but was apparently nutritious. He watched the room. He saw a finny food vendor near the entrance, a small creature trying to sell bowls of steaming broth. Grun walked in with Tor and Bale behind him. The mess hall went quiet. Grun walked up to the vendor, picked up a bowl, sniffed it, and slapped it out of the vendor's hands. The broth splashed across the floor. Grun laughed. Tor and Bale laughed. The vendor stood there, dripping, and said nothing. Nobody in the mess hall moved. Danny watched all of it. He did not stand up. He did not say a word. But something shifted behind his eyes. something cold and patient and very old. It was the same look he used to get in the ring back home, right before the bell rang. He finished his meal, cleared his tray, and went back to his quarters. Tomorrow was his first day on the job. He would keep his head down and do his work and mind his own business. That was the plan, anyway. The crate weighed 320 kilograms. Danny knew this because the label on the side said so in 4 different languages. He also knew this because 3 Drally workers had spent 10 minutes trying to push it onto the cargo lift with a hover dolly before the dolly broke. Danny walked over, gripped the crate from the bottom, and lifted it onto the platform himself. The Drally workers stared at him with their 6 eyes each. One of them made a clicking sound that his translator picked up as a swear word. Deathworlder, another one whispered. Danny wiped his hands on his pants. Just heavy gravity, mate. Earth pulls harder than most places. That was his first week on Station Farron in a nutshell. Lift things, move things, stack things, repeat. The cargo bay was hot, loud, and never empty. Ships docked at all hours, and each one needed unloading. Danny did the work of 4 regular workers and never complained about it. His co-workers, a mix of Finny, Drally, and a few species he still could not name, watched him with a mix of admiration and quiet fear. The fear was not personal. It was biological. Danny had looked up his own species file in the Galactic Registry during a break. Humans were listed as Class 12 Death World Origin. The file included notes about Earth, a planet with active tectonic plates, extreme weather, predatory megafauna, toxic plant life, and a gravity rating that most galactic species would consider punishment. The file also noted that humans had persistence hunted their prey to extinction across an entire continent before they even invented metal tools. Danny read that part twice and then closed the file. He did not feel like a monster. He felt like a man with sore shoulders who wanted a cup of tea. But nobody on the station seemed to know what Class 12 meant. To them, Danny was just the new hire who was unusually strong for his size. Interesting, but not important. Grun noticed him on day 4. It was in the main corridor outside the cargo bay. Danny was heading to the mess hall after his shift. Grun was coming the other way with Tor and Bale flanking him as always. The corridor was narrow. Workers scattered to the sides like they always did. Danny did not scatter. He was tired, he was hungry, and the corridor was wide enough for everyone if people walked normally. He kept his pace, passed Grun on the left, and kept going. Grun stopped. He turned and watched Danny walk away. Nobody had done that before. Everyone moved for Grun. That was how the lower decks worked. You saw Grun coming and you got out of the way. It was not a rule anyone had written down. It was survival. But the human had walked past him like he was furniture. Tor leaned over and muttered something. Grun's gray-plated face tightened. He said nothing and kept walking. Over the next 3 days, it happened again and again. Danny did not move aside. He did not lower his eyes. He did not change his route or his pace. He was not doing it to be brave or to make a statement. He simply did not have the instinct to submit. Humans did not evolve that way. On Earth, you did not survive by showing your belly to something bigger than you. Grun did not like it. His entire operation depended on fear. He shook down vendors and clerks for weekly credits. He took what he wanted from the mess hall. He walked through the lower decks like a king because everyone treated him like one. And now there was one worker who did not seem to care. It was a Thursday afternoon when things came to a head. Danny was unloading a shipment near the supply corridor when he heard a familiar sound. Rilla's voice, small and frightened. He set down the crate and listened. Around the corner, Grun had Rilla pinned against the wall. One of his 4 hands gripped the front of her uniform. His face was close to hers. He was demanding her weekly payment. Rilla was trying to explain that she was short this cycle, that her pay had been docked for a clerical error, that she would have it next week. Grun did not care about next week. He lifted her off the ground by her collar. Her feet dangled. She made a choking sound. Danny came around the corner. He stopped about 3 meters away. "Put her down," he said. His voice was calm, flat, the way someone asks you to pass the salt. Grun turned his massive head. He looked at Danny, this stocky little creature, barely reaching his chest, covered in soft skin with no armor and no claws and no extra limbs. Grun's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. What did you say, soft skin? I said put her down. Grun dropped Rila. She hit the floor, gasping, and scrambled backward. Grun stepped toward Danny. He was enormous up close. Gray plates covered his torso and arms like natural body armor. His four hands curled into fists the size of Danny's head. He poked Danny in the chest with one thick finger. Hard. Hard enough to send most species stumbling backward into the wall. Danny did not move. Grun's smile faded. Grun poked him again. Harder this time. Two fingers from two different arms, jabbing into Danny's sternum like someone testing whether a wall was real. Danny rocked back on his heels about half an inch. Then he settled, feet planted, shoulders square. He looked up at Grun with an expression that had no anger in it and no fear in it either. Just patience. The kind of patience that comes from a species that once tracked wounded animals across open plains for days without stopping. I'm giving you one chance, Danny said quietly. Walk away. Grun stared down at him. The corridor had gone completely silent. Workers pressed against the walls. Rilla was still on the floor behind Grun, holding her throat. Tor and Bale stood a few steps back, watching with dull interest. They had seen this before. Someone stands up to Grun. Grun breaks them. Everyone remembers the lesson. Grun shoved Danny with two arms. A full push, both palms flat against his chest, with the weight of a 7-foot armored predator behind it. Danny slid back half a step on the metal floor. His boots scraped. Then he stopped. He was still standing, still looking up at Grun. Something crossed Grun's face. It was not fear. Not yet. It was confusion. The shove should have sent Danny into the far wall. It should have cracked ribs. That was how Bathory's strength worked against most species. But the human had absorbed it like the floor absorbs rain. Before Grun could process this, a sharp voice cut through the corridor. Enough. Sergeant Oda Vess stepped around the corner with two security officers behind her. She was Pal Lori, tall, lean, deep green skin, with eyes that missed nothing. She had been running station security for 11 years, and she was very tired of Grun. Break it up. Both of you. Now. Grun stepped back slowly, keeping his eyes on Danny. He flexed his four hands once, then turned and walked away. Tor and Bale followed. They did not look back. Vess watched them go, then turned to Danny. She looked him up and down. She had read his species file when he was hired. She knew what Class 12 meant, even if nobody else on this station did. Come with me, she said. She took Danny to a small security office near the cargo bay. It smelled like old coffee and recycled air. She sat behind a desk covered in data pads and gestured for him to sit. You're either very brave or very new, she said. Bit of both, Danny replied. Grun has hospitalized 14 workers in the last 2 years. Broken bones, internal bleeding. One Fenny lost an eye. We file reports, and nothing happens because Grun has connections above the lower decks. The station council looks the other way because Grun keeps the smuggling lanes quiet and the cargo flowing. Danny listened without interrupting. I'm telling you this so you understand what you are walking into, Vess continued. I cannot protect you down there. I do not have the staff, and I do not have the authority. If Grun decides to come after you, the best I can do is write a report after the fact. Danny nodded. I appreciate the honesty, Sergeant. So you will stay out of his way? Danny did not answer that directly. He thanked her for her time and left. That evening, Rilla found him in the mess hall. She sat across from him with a tray of food she was barely touching. There was a bruise forming on her neck where Grun had gripped her collar. Please do not make him angry, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. There was a drowsy worker named Fossick. He told Grun to stop taking his credits. Grun broke both his legs and 3 of his ribs. Fossick spent 3 months in the medical bay. When he came out, he transferred to a different station and never came back. Danny looked at the bruise on her neck. He did that to you today. It is normal. He does it to many of us. That does not make it normal, Rilla. She looked at him with her big dark eyes. There was something in them that he recognized. The look of someone who had been afraid for so long that they had forgotten what safe felt like. Danny had seen that look before, in shelters back on Earth, in the eyes of people who had been pushed around their whole lives. I'm not looking for a fight, Danny said, but I'm not going to stand there and watch someone get hurt. I cannot do that. It is not in me. Rilla did not argue. She just looked down at her food and nodded slowly. Later that night, in a section of the lower decks that smelled like rust and coolant, Grun sat in his private space, surrounded by Tor and Bale. He had pulled up the Galactic Species Registry on a wall screen. The entry for humans was short. Most of it was biological data, bone density, muscle composition, cardiovascular endurance. Numbers that would mean nothing to most readers. But at the top of the file, in red text, was the classification, Death World Origin. Class 12. Grun stared at it. He had fought plenty of species. He had beaten Drally, Finney, Pal Lori, even a Keshan trader once. None of them were rated above Class 5. Class 12. He turned off the screen and leaned back. His plated jaw tightened. It did not matter. He was Bathory. He was bigger, stronger, and had 4 arms. No creature that small and that soft could be a real threat. He was sure of it. Almost. Grun spent the next 3 days doing something he had never done before. He watched. He sat in the corridors and the mess hall and the cargo bay entrance, and he watched Danny Harlow work. He watched the human lift crates that should have required a machine. He watched him carry 2 at once without slowing down. He watched Danny work a double shift and walk out at the end of it looking tired but not broken. Every other species on the lower decks would have collapsed halfway through. The human just kept going. This bothered Grun more than he would admit. But what bothered him most was not Danny's strength. It was what Danny's strength was doing to the lower decks. The vendors were getting bold. 2 of them had been late on their weekly payments. One had actually looked Grun in the eye when he came to collect, something that had not happened in years. A Drally cargo worker had mumbled something under his breath when Tor shoved past him. Small things. Tiny cracks in a wall that Grun had spent years building. And it was all because of one quiet human who would not flinch. Grun understood power. He understood that fear was a living thing that needed to be fed. If people saw someone stand up to him and survive, the fear started to die. And once the fear died, everything died with it. The payments, the respect, the control. He needed to send a message. Not to Danny. Danny was a problem for later. He needed to send a message to everyone else. He needed to remind the lower decks what happened when someone brought hope into his territory. He chose Rila. It was late evening. The shift change had emptied most of the corridors near the docking bay. Rila was walking back to her quarters alone, carrying a bag of medical supplies she had picked up from the clinic. She was humming something, a Finney melody, soft and sad, the kind her mother used to sing. She had not hummed in months. Something about Danny standing up to Grun had loosened a knot inside her chest. It felt like the beginning of something, like maybe things could change. She did not hear Grun until he was right behind her. His hand closed around her shoulder and spun her around. The medical bag flew from her grip and scattered across the floor. Rila looked up and saw Grun's face, gray plates pulled tight, for arms rigid at his sides, eyes like black stones. "Your human friend," Grun said slowly. "He thinks he is brave." "Please," Rila whispered. "I did not ask him to." Grun hit her. An open palm across the face with enough force to send her spinning into the corridor wall. She bounced off the metal and hit the floor. Her vision blurred. She tasted something warm and metallic. "This is what brave gets you," Grun said. He kicked her bag down the corridor. Medical vials shattered against the wall. "This is what happens when soft-skins play hero. You think he can protect you? He is not here now." Rila curled into a ball on the floor. She could feel something wrong in her side, a sharp pain that got worse when she breathed. A cracked rib, maybe. She had treated enough of them in other workers to recognize the feeling. Grun leaned down close to her face. "Tell your human what happened. Tell him Grun sends his regards." Then he walked away. His footsteps echoed down the corridor until they faded into nothing. A Drally worker named Fossick, the same Fossick who had once stood up to Grun and paid for it with 3 months in medical, found Rila 5 minutes later. He helped her to the medical bay, and then he ran. He ran through the cargo corridors and the loading docks and the maintenance tunnels until he found Danny. Danny was finishing his shift. He had a crate on his shoulder, 300 kilograms of machine parts destined for the upper decks. Fossick skidded to a stop in front of him, out of breath, his 6 eyes wide with panic. The Finny girl, Fawcett gasped. Rila, Grun beat her. She is in medical. Her face, it is bad. Danny set the crate down. He did not drop it. He did not throw it. He placed it on the floor gently, like someone putting a child to bed. Then he straightened up. The Drowley workers nearby would talk about what they saw on Danny's face for years afterward. They would describe it to friends and family and strangers in bars across 3 different star systems. They would say that they had worked alongside 100 different species and had seen anger and rage and fury in all shapes and sizes. But they had never seen anything like what crossed the human's face in that moment. It was not rage. Rage was hot and loud and messy. This was something else. This was cold. This was still. This was a calculation happening behind a pair of brown eyes. A predator brain running numbers that had been programmed by 1,000,000 years of evolution on the most violent planet in the catalog galaxy. Danny walked out of the cargo bay without a word. He went to the medical bay first. Rila was lying on a bed with a medic scanning her ribs. Her face was swollen on one side. Purple bruises were forming across her blue fur. She looked up at Danny and tried to smile. He sat with her. He held her small hand in his rough one until the painkillers kicked in and she drifted asleep. Then he stood up. He walked to the lower deck corridors, the ones that everyone knew belonged to Grun. He walked with his hands at his sides and his shoulders loose and his jaw set. Tor and Bale saw him coming from the far end of the corridor. They stood up from their seats and stepped forward to block his path. Danny did not slow down. Tor was the first to make a mistake. He reached out with his upper right arm and grabbed Danny's shoulder to stop him. It was a move that had worked on every species Tor had ever handled. You grab, you squeeze, you shove. Simple. Effective. The target stumbles, realizes how strong you are, and backs down. Danny caught Tor's wrist with his left hand. He did not slap it away. He did not push it. He locked his grip around it like a steel clamp and twisted. The motion was fast and clean, a wrist lock that Danny had learned in a Glasgow gym when he was 16 years old. Back then, his coach had told him that technique beats size every single time. Tor's arm bent in a direction it was not designed to go. His plated skin cracked at the joint. Before he could scream, Danny used the leverage to pivot and throw Tor sideways into the corridor wall. 300 pounds of Bathory hit the metal panel at full speed. The wall dented inward. Tor bounced off it, hit the floor, and did not get up. 3 seconds. That was all it took. Bale processed what had just happened about 1 second too late. He charged with all 4 arms swinging, a wild, uncoordinated attack fueled by panic more than skill. Danny ducked under the first 2 arms. The third caught him on the shoulder, a glancing blow that would have shattered a Finney's collarbone. Danny felt it, but it did not stop him. It did not even slow him. He came up from the duck with his right fist already moving. A single uppercut, driven from the legs through the hips, through the shoulder, and into the point of Bale's jaw. Every amateur boxer in Glasgow knew this punch. Every Friday night in the ring, Danny had thrown it 1,000 times. The difference was that on Earth, his opponents weighed 80 kilograms and wore gloves. Bale weighed 270 kilograms and had natural body armor. It did not matter. The uppercut connected with a sound like a gunshot. Bale's head snapped back. His eyes went blank. His 4 arms dropped to his sides. He fell backward like a tree in a storm, straight and stiff and heavy. He hit the floor, and the impact shook the corridor. He was unconscious before he landed. 7 seconds total. 2 Bathory enforcers down. Workers were watching from doorways and side corridors now. Finney and Drowley and species that Danny did not even recognize, all standing in silence, all staring with wide eyes. None of them had ever seen anything like this. The Bathory were supposed to be the strongest species on the station. They were supposed to be untouchable. At the end of the corridor, Grun stood up from his seat. He had watched the whole thing. He had watched Tor get thrown into a wall. He had watched Bale drop from a single punch. And for the first time in his life, Grun felt something crawl up his spine that he did not recognize. Fear. Real, genuine, animal fear. The kind that prey feels when the predator steps out of the tall grass. But Grun was Bathory. He was 7 feet tall and covered in natural armor. He had 4 arms and decades of fighting experience. He had beaten every species on this station. He told himself that what happened to Tor and Bale was luck. Surprise. A trick. It would not work on him. He stepped forward. He spread all four arms wide. He roared, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the metal floor and made the watching workers flinch. Danny kept walking toward him. Grun swung first, a massive right hook with his upper arm, carrying enough force to cave in a bulkhead door. Danny leaned back and the fist sailed past his face close enough to ruffle his hair. Grun followed with his lower arms, two straight punches aimed at Danny's chest. Both connected. Both hit him square. Danny grunted. He slid back a full step. But he did not fall. He did not break. This was the moment that became legend on Orbital Station Farron. The moment that would be replayed on security footage thousands of times and shared across the galactic network. The moment when a 7-foot Bathorian Forcer hit a human with everything he had, and the human looked back at him with blood on his lip and something ancient in his eyes. Grun threw everything after that, all four arms working in rotation. Hooks, jabs, hammer fists, elbows. He was fast for his size. He was powerful. Some of the blows landed. Danny's left eye swelled. A cut opened above his eyebrow. A hit to his ribs made him wince. But Danny did not stop moving. He slipped punches. He rolled with the ones that landed. He let his bones and his muscles and his ridiculous death world biology absorb what would have killed a lesser species. And he waited. Grun was getting tired. For arms required enormous energy. His swings were slowing. His breathing was ragged. He had never had a fight last this long because every fight he had ever been in ended in the first few seconds. Danny saw the opening. He stepped inside Grun's guard, close enough to smell him. He drove his left fist into Grun's knee joint, right where the armor plates did not overlap. Grun's leg buckled. Before Grun could recover, Danny buried his right fist into the soft spot below Grun's chest plates, the solar plexus equivalent. Every molecule of air left Grun's lungs in a single gasp. And then Danny threw the right hook. It was the same punch he had used on Bale. The same punch he had thrown in Glasgow gyms 1,000 times. But this one he loaded with everything. Every ounce of frustration and cold fury and death world muscle fiber in his body. It connected with the side of Grun's head, right behind the jaw plate. The crack echoed through the corridor like a snapping cable. Grun went down. He hit the floor face first. The metal buckled under his weight. He did not move. He did not twitch. He was breathing, but just barely. Danny stood over him. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. His left eye was almost shut. His ribs ached with every breath. He stood there for a long moment, looking down at the creature who had terrorized an entire station. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He turned around and walked back toward the medical bay to check on Rila. Behind him, the corridor was silent except for the sound of Grun breathing on the floor and the quiet, disbelieving whispers of 40 workers who had just watched the galaxy change. The security footage leaked before Grun even woke up in the medical bay. Someone, nobody ever found out who, copied the recording from the corridor cameras and uploaded it to the station's internal network. Within an hour, every worker on the lower decks had seen it. Within 3 hours, it had spread to the upper decks. By the next morning, it had jumped to the galactic network and was being watched on stations and colonies across 4 different star systems. The comment section was a mess. Some species refused to believe it was real. Others pulled up the human species file and read it for the first time. A few military analysts from the Palori Defense Council watched the footage frame by frame and quietly increased their species threat assessment for humans from moderate to critical. On Station Farron itself, the reaction was simpler. People were not analyzing. They were celebrating. Sergeant Oda Vess arrived at Grun's section of the lower decks with a full security team at 0600 the next morning. She had waited years for this moment. Grun was still in the medical bay with a fractured jaw plate, 3 cracked ribs, and a knee that would never work properly again. Tor had a dislocated shoulder and a concussion. Bale had a broken jaw and was still having trouble remembering his own name. Vess arrested all 3 of them. The charges were long: assault, extortion, racketeering, intimidation, destruction of property, and 14 counts of grievous bodily harm going back 2 years. She had always had the witness statements. What she had never had was witnesses willing to sign them. That changed overnight. 26 station workers walked into the security office and put their names on official complaints. Some of them were shaking when they did it. They signed anyway. Danny was called in for questioning that afternoon. He sat in the same small office where Vess had warned him about Grunt a week earlier. His left eye was swollen shut and colored a deep purple. His ribs were taped. His hands were bandaged. He looked like he'd been hit by a shuttle. Vess sat across from him and studied his face. Technically, she said, you committed assault on 3 individuals. Danny nodded. The Station Security Council has reviewed the footage along with Rila's medical report and the 26 worker statements filed in your defense. She paused. They have ruled your actions as justifiable intervention on behalf of an endangered civilian. Danny blinked his one good eye. So, I'm not in trouble. You are not in trouble. Vess almost smiled. Almost. But if you could avoid putting any more bathory through my corridor walls, I would appreciate it. The maintenance team is already complaining. Danny thanked her and left. Rilla spent 4 days in the medical bay. The cracked rib healed fast with the station's medical technology. The bruises on her face took longer. When she finally returned to the processing office on the lower decks, something had changed. Workers greeted her by name. A Drally cargo handler brought her a cup of tea. Actual tea, the kind Danny drank, imported from Earth at ridiculous cost. A Finny vendor stopped by her counter and left a small bundle of sweet cakes wrapped in cloth without saying a word. Rilla sat behind her counter and held the tea with both hands and cried quietly for about 5 minutes. Then she wiped her face and went back to work. The lower decks were different now. Not fixed, not perfect, but different. The corridor where Grun used to hold court was just a corridor again. Workers walked through it without pressing against the walls. Vendors sold their food without looking over their shoulders. The air itself seemed lighter, like a pressure seal had been released somewhere. Danny went back to hauling crates. He did not talk about the fight. He did not mention it. When co-workers brought it up, he shrugged and changed the subject. When new arrivals heard the story and came to the cargo bay expecting to find some kind of legendary warrior, they found a stocky, quiet man in dirty work clothes lifting heavy things and drinking tea from a metal cup during his breaks. That is the human, they would whisper. That is the human, someone would reply. It did not make sense to them. He was not big enough, not scary enough, not impressive enough. He looked like a man who paid his taxes and went to bed early, which he was. He was also from a planet where the rain could kill you, and the trees had learned to fight back, and the dominant species had clawed its way to the top of the food chain through sheer bloody stubbornness. Weeks passed. The station settled into its new rhythm. Grun and his crew were transferred to a detention facility on the other side of the system. The smuggling routes they had controlled were shut down or taken over by less violent operators. Life went on. Then one afternoon, a new alien arrived on the lower decks. He was big. Not bathory big, but close. A Tessic 6.5 feet tall with dark red scales and thick arms that ended in clawed hands. He walked through the corridor with his chest puffed out and his jaw set in the universal expression of someone who thought he was important. He shoved a vendor out of his way without breaking stride. The vendor's tray clattered to the floor. The Tessic kept walking. Then he stopped. Danny was sitting on a cargo crate about 20 feet ahead, legs dangling over the edge, holding a metal cup of tea. He was watching the Tessic the way someone watches rain through a window, calm, unhurried, mildly interested. The vendor picked himself up off the floor. He brushed off his clothes. He looked at the Tessic, and then he looked at Danny, and then he looked back at the Tessic. I would not do that if I were you, the vendor said quietly. The Tessic frowned. He looked at Danny. Danny looked back. He took a slow sip of tea. Something passed between them in that moment. Some wordless exchange that every predator in the galaxy understood. The quick, silent calculation of whether a fight was worth having. The Tessic's eyes moved from Danny's bandaged hands to his calm face to the dent still visible in the corridor wall where Tor had landed. The Tessic looked away first. He straightened his shoulders, stepped carefully around the vendor's fallen tray, and walked away without another word. Danny finished his tea. He set the empty cup down beside him. He hopped off the crate and went back to work. Just another day on orbital station Farron.